It's 12 minutes past 8. Now, a group of parents whose children took their own lives while at university are campaigning for a change in the law.
They want universities to have a legal duty of care towards students, the same responsibility that applies to employers to keep their staff safe at work.
Well, tomorrow the issue is going to be debated in Parliament, and we're joined now by the parents of Oscar and Natasha, who both died by suicide at university. Thank you both for joining us. Not an easy thing to talk about, I'm sure. I'll start by asking you about Oscar and Natasha. What was he like?
Oscar was quite a quiet child. As he got older, he became a lot more outgoing. He loved film, he loved people, loved music, and loved cycling, watching it and taking part in it. And he was quite an outgoing character, you know.
And that's how you'd characterise him when he was at university?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. He just loved people so much, loved being around people and meeting new people.
And what about Natasha?
She was kind of the perfect child. She was always very helpful. She always wanted to be to contribute to things. Had a good group of friends. Very, very diligent with her work. Very conscientious. If there was anything she didn't know, she'd go away and look things up. So she was people described as being very, very independent. And she loved baking. Any excuse to bake. Any fairs at school, she was baking for them, and she loved playing the piano and cello, and she also loved physics. She described herself as a bit of a nerd, but she was very dedicated with how she studied.
And were there any sort of warning signs that you felt the university could have picked up on?
Well, there was an email saying that she was feeling suicidal and to some extent attempted it. Now, to me, that's a bit more than a warning sign.
Mm. And the debate that's happening tomorrow, you've been pushing for some time. How do you feel that it's now got to this stage, and what would you like to see the outcome?
It's like when something happens like this, everyone's trying to push it under the carpet. Nobody sort of wants to talk about it, and not to us even. And there's a sense that they don't want to find out what's going on. And we've been fighting now for 5 years, isn't it? To get people to listen. And we can't talk directly to the university. We need to talk through somebody else. So it's fantastic that we've got to this point where people are finally listening or prepared to listen. But what we really need them is to look at what's happened, to look at the issues, and to do something to change, because it's been 5 years and there's been very little change, despite the facade that change is happening. It's too slow, and that's putting people's lives at risk.
Gary, what would you like to see when you think about the experiences that you've had and you think about young people's mental health? It's a very intense time of life, leaving your family for the first time, going to university, and there seems to be this absence of responsibility of care. What would you like to see made statutory?
We would like we'd like a statutory duty of care. We'd just like the universities to act reasonably. In Oscar's case, there had been an attempt on his life. He had attempted to take his life. The university hadn't contacted us. They said at the inquest that a suicide attempt didn't cross the threshold for disclosure, which we just found is how can that possibly be reasonable?
So as things stand, what is the chain reaction of actions that a university will take in a situation like that, when you obviously have a young person whose mental health is in crisis?
There didn't seem to be one in place as in such. I mean, we only found out after Oscar had died that he'd attempted, and the attempt, he'd been taken off to hospital. It was logged by security that he'd gone, and then he walked straight back in the next day to his halls, and again it was logged. Oscar Carrick's walked back in the building, what do I do? And nothing seemed to happen. Somebody did try and contact him, but there didn't seem to be a process in which there was a follow-through of what should happen and who should deal with it. It just seemed to be logged, you know, and then 2 days later he had another crisis, and the security guard writes, well, nothing seems to be happening.
And does that reflect your experience as well?
I mean, the situation with Natasha is that she found it really difficult to talk to people, and one of the requirements of the course was to give oral interviews and presentations, and they knew that she struggled with it because she ran out of them. And yet there seemed to be constant pressure on her to do it, and she'd got to a point where she was basically going to fail, or certainly on paper, she was going to fail the course and be thrown out because this was a must-pass module. Now, I can't see any evidence that they spoke to her about this. I don't think they intended to throw her off, but wouldn't it be helpful to tell somebody that?
The point here is to act in a timely manner. They allowed this to go on for 6 whole months. She became worse and worse, more depressed, then suicidal, and they still continued. We made no changes.
The university said they do prioritise mental health of the students, and they say that record numbers of children and young adults are now experiencing poor mental health. And they say they invest in student support and develop partnerships with NHS services. And actually, Sheffield Hallam also said similarly. The point they make is once that referral's made, that young person then becomes in the hands of the NHS of social care.
OK, let me explain duty of care. Duty of care is about the behaviour of staff. We're asking for a professional standard of behaviour for the staff in everything they do, across all their processes. And that standard is to act reasonably. It doesn't seem a big ask. So it's got nothing to do with anything you've just read out. It's to do with the processes they operate. We want safer processes, the dismissal process, the fitness to study process, the examination process, the complaints procedure process, and as we heard, the getting consent and contacting parents process. They need to be made to operate safely. That's what we're asking for. That is the duty of care, to care about your students when you put them through educational processes. It's not about the NHS. It's not about even support services and providing more. Obviously, that's needed. It's making what you do educationally safer.
Do you think there's a worry among some of the universities that the students would react badly if the information was passed on to relatives and the student felt that that had been an invasion of their privacy?
OK, you've switched it to the university argument, to the phone mum argument. It's not about that. Universities UK has very clear guidance. Staff should make every effort to gain consent. What we're saying is, when you've got it, you should flipping well phone them and not do nothing.
You're nodding your head.
Yeah, well, Oscar did consent. So consent to share his information with ourselves and his GP when he entered the wellbeing system, and we were told that that consent wasn't retrospective, so they didn't have to tell us about the suicide attempt. What they could have said was he was on P-star of their system, and that was the highest, or he'd been lowered to a different one. They could have told us something, but they chose to tell us nothing. Now, whether Oscar knew that consent was meaningless, I have no idea.
You will never know, and
No.
I guess as parents you feel like you can't unpick it, then you can't go back in time, and this tragedy has happened and those links were missed at the time.
Yeah, and the thing is, this duty care isn't about our children, because our children are gone. We can't bring them back, but we can save other people's. We can save, you know, your grandson, your son, your flatmate. We can save those people by this change in the law.
Do you feel like this is a moment for Oscar and for other young people, this debate that's happening and the prominence that it's being given?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Well, we hope to give them the prominence, and yeah, we're hoping that's going to be the case.
If there's anybody watching, a chancellor perhaps from a university now, what would your plea to them be for change?
Adopt a legal statutory duty of care. For most people, it isn't going to make a difference. It isn't going to make a difference for most students. It'll just be there like it is for my employment, you know. But when it's needed, like when I went off sick, when Oscar died, there's a machine that kicks in and people know how to deal with people and people know what to do. And at the moment, that does not exist.
Because there will be people at both universities who said, we did care, we did see the warning signs, nobody wanted this outcome. but it's that absence of wheels being put in motion.
Very much the absence of people, of the wheels put into motion. You know, we're a big group of families. Okay, there's only 2 here, but actually there's 25, 30 families. And what often happens is the university are aware of the problem and they kick the can down the road. They don't do anything, or they wait to see what happens. And sometimes your common sense is that this is actually high risk, as it was in Oscar's case and Natasha's case, and maybe they need to think about doing what they're doing slightly differently, rather than letting the NHS sort it out. They're responsible for what they do, and if they don't take into account how well or unwell a student is, I mean, what's the point of telling them that you've got a problem? They encourage people to come and say, and then they're not required to do anything different once they know. That's incongruous.
It just stops there.
They need to have some system where they actually have to sort of. It's only about being reasonable. It's only about thinking about the student and what would be a reasonable thing. We're not asking them to work with people with severe mental health, not with the mental health side, but we are expecting them to work on the education side and think about how they deal with people's mental health.
The issue is that everyone's focused on suicide. We're talking about harm. Harm comes in all different sorts of guises, at all different stages and at all different levels. If you don't harm people at the beginning of your course or the problem, or allow them to be harmed by not doing something, the problem diminishes. You tackle the problem at source, and universities are too into student blaming and are not accepting that they are actually part of the problem by not doing what is reasonably expected.
Okay, Bob, Maggie, and to you as well, Maxine and Gary, appreciate it's a very sensitive topic. Must be very hard to talk and go over it again, but we really appreciate you coming in and shedding some light on it all and sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your time. We're so sorry for your loss, and we hope the debate tomorrow proves fruitful. Thank you.